Hello! If you like stories like this, subscribe to this channel to not miss new videos. Before everything changed, before the money, before the glittering distractions and the secret text messages I wasn't supposed to see, life was simple. Not easy, but simple. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery that woke us every morning with the smell of bread rising. The wallpaper was peeling in the hallway, the faucet leaked no matter how many times my husband, Daniel, tried to fix it, and the neighbors upstairs fought so loudly I sometimes thought the ceiling would cave in. But it was ours. Daniel worked long shifts at an auto shop. He came home smelling of oil and sweat, his hands blackened, his knuckles often scraped. I worked as a substitute teacher, moving from classroom to classroom, filling in for absent teachers, always temporary, always floating. The pay was modest, but I told myself it mattered, that maybe one child would remember me, the way I'd once remembered my favorite teacher who told me I had a voice worth listening to. Money was always tight. We argued about bills sometimes, though not bitterly. Just the kind of arguments two people have when they're scared the checking account won't stretch to the end of the month. Still, when Daniel wrapped his arms around me at night, pulling me close, whispering that things would get better, I believed him. Because he always had a way of making me believe. What we lacked in money, we made up for in small joys. A shared pizza on Friday nights, long walks when the weather was kind, laughter over silly TV shows. He would rest his head on my lap as we watched, pretending to fall asleep just so I'd stroke his hair. If I'm honest, though, there were moments, even before the money, when I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, a hunger. Not just the kind of hunger that comes from wanting more for us, but the kind that whispers, "You deserve better, bigger, shinier." He'd stop mid-sentence sometimes when a sleek car passed us on the street, or when we'd catch a glimpse of the kind of house we could never afford. I brushed it off. Everyone has dreams, don't they? Everyone wonders about the life just out of reach. But Daniel had a way of holding on to those moments, as if he wasn't just wondering, he was waiting. The night that would change our lives forever began like any other. We sat at our little kitchen table eating pasta I'd stretched into 2 meals. He was distracted, tapping something into his phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Nothing," he said quickly, but then smiled. "Just checking a number." It was a lottery number. I laughed when I realized, shaking my head. He'd bought a ticket on a whim that morning. Daniel never played the lottery seriously, just once in a blue moon when the jackpot caught his eye. When the numbers came on TV, I didn't even bother watching. I washed dishes, humming to myself. Then I heard him actually choke on the beer he was drinking. "Claire," he said, his voice hoarse. "Come here." I dried my hands and turned, annoyed. "What?" His eyes were wide, the kind of wide that didn't look real, like a child seeing fireworks for the first time. His hands trembled as he held out the ticket. "We won, Claire. We won. 7 million. At first I laughed, a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You're joking." But he wasn't. The numbers lined up perfectly, one after another, a perfect match. I remember leaning against the counter, my legs going weak. My heart raced as if the world itself had tilted. $7 million. We were rich. Overnight. Daniel grabbed me, spinning me in the kitchen, both of us laughing and crying at once. It felt like a dream. One of those moments you think can only happen to someone else, not us, the couple with secondhand furniture, with a broken faucet, with bills shoved in a drawer because we couldn't face them. We stayed up late that night, whispering our plans. Pay off debts, buy a house, travel, help my parents with their mortgage. Maybe I could even quit substitute teaching and find something more stable. Daniel said he'd open his own auto shop, be his own boss. His face lit up with possibilities. I remember looking at him then, the man I had married in a simple dress with daisies in my hair, the man who once promised me forever, even though forever looked like cracked tiles and thrift store clothes. And I thought, we made it. This is our second chance. I couldn't have known, how could I have, that the same money that made me feel like we'd finally been blessed would become the knife that cut us apart. That night, we fell asleep tangled in each other's arms, dreaming of new beginnings. But I should have paid closer attention to the way his eyes lingered on the ticket, even in the dark, the way he held it tighter than he held me. Because in the end, it wasn't just $7 million. It was 7 million reasons to forget who we used to be. The next morning, reality hit like sunlight through thin curtains. The numbers were still the same. The ticket was still real. Daniel had barely slept, tossing and turning, clutching his phone as if someone might break in and snatch the winnings out of his hands. By noon, the local news station was buzzing about the mysterious winner. The ticket had been bought at the corner gas station we stopped at nearly every Friday, the one with sticky floors and an ancient soda machine humming in the corner. Suddenly, that dingy little shop was famous. We were famous. Daniel insisted on taking me with him when he went to claim the prize. My hands shook as we filled out the forms, as officials congratulated us with 2 wide smiles as flashbulbs popped. It felt like stepping into a different life through a door we hadn't even realized was open. $7 million. Even after taxes, it was more than I had ever imagined holding in my lifetime. The numbers on the check didn't look real. Too many zeros strung together like beads on a necklace I could never afford. The first week was a blur. Calls from relatives we hadn't spoken to in years, neighbors suddenly dropping by to say hello, to remind us of favors they'd once done. Even strangers somehow tracked us down, slipping letters under our door, begging for help with medical bills or college funds. Daniel soaked it in. Every handshake, every congratulations, every moment of being noticed. I saw him stand taller, laugh louder, as though he'd been waiting his whole life for this spotlight. We moved quickly. Too quickly, maybe. Daniel didn't want to stay in the apartment another day. Said it was beneath us now. The bakery smells that had once comforted me suddenly disgusted him. Within 2 weeks, we were touring houses in neighborhoods I'd only ever driven past in awe. I still remember the first time we walked into the mansion he would insist on buying. Marble floors so polished they reflected our faces. A staircase that curved like something out of a movie. Chandeliers dripping with crystal. I felt small in that place, like a child playing dress-up. "Can you believe this?" Daniel whispered, his arm around me. "This is ours, Claire. We deserve this." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to share in his joy. But as I walked from room to room, counting the endless bedrooms, the cavernous kitchen with more ovens than I'd ever need, I felt something else too. Unease. Wasn't this too much? Too fast? But Daniel was already talking about furniture, about cars, about the parties we could host. His eyes glimmered in a way I hadn't seen before. Sharp, hungry, almost feverish. We bought the house. Of course we did. And soon after, a new car for him. A sleek black one that purred when it moved, turning heads on every street. He spent hours polishing it, more time than he ever spent with me those first few weeks. the changes didn't stop there. He bought clothes, though designer brands I didn't even know how to pronounce, watches that cost more than my yearly salary. He hired a personal trainer, started going to a private gym. At first, I told myself it was fine. We had the money. Why shouldn't he enjoy it? Why shouldn't we both? But I noticed this subtle shift in how he looked at me, the way his eyes swept over my thrift store dresses, my scuffed shoes, the simple gold band on my finger. He never said anything outright, but there was a question in his gaze, unspoken. Do you still fit into this new life? I tried to keep up, bought new clothes, though my choices were modest compared to his, tried to learn about wine, about the art of hosting dinners where conversation was measured in status and not warmth. But in those glittering rooms, surrounded by people who seemed to appear from nowhere, bankers, real estate agents, distant cousins who now acted like best friends, I felt invisible. Daniel, though, thrived. He laughed louder than anyone else, slapped backs, clinked glasses, told stories of how we had struggled and how we had finally arrived. But in those moments, it didn't feel like we. It felt like him. The first crack appeared one night at a party we hosted. I'd slipped away to the kitchen to refill drinks, trying to steady myself after hours of smiling at strangers. When I returned, I saw him across the room. He was standing too close to a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger, tall, draped in a glittering dress that seemed poured over her curves. She leaned in, whispering something in his ear, and he laughed in a way that my stomach twisted. When his eyes flicked towards me, just for a second, there was something in them I couldn't place. Guilt? Or worse, indifference. He didn't introduce me to her. That night, as we lay in our oversized bed, I asked who she was. No one, he said too quickly. Just a friend of a friend. I wanted to believe him. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was insecure in this new world we didn't understand. But even as I closed my eyes, I could not shake the sound of his laughter with her. Different somehow. Lighter. Like a door opening I wasn't allowed to walk through. And though I didn't know it then, that was the beginning. The moment the money stopped being a blessing and started becoming a wedge between us. They say money doesn't change people. It only reveals who they really are. I used to think that was just something bitter people said when they saw someone else succeed. But now, watching Daniel move through our new world, I began to wonder if maybe it was true. The Daniel I married had rough hands, calloused from hours of work, a smile that cracked open after a long day when I set his plate of food on the table. He was grounded, simple, content. At least, I thought he was. But the Daniel in front of me now, he was someone else. It started with the invitations. They came in glossy envelopes, heavy cardstock embossed with gold lettering. Parties, galas, charity events, worlds I had never belonged to. But Daniel now insisted we attend. They're networking opportunities, he told me, adjusting his cufflinks one evening before we left for another event. You don't get ahead by staying home, Claire. You have to meet the right people. The right people always seemed to look the same. Polished, hungry, sharp as glass. The women dripped in jewels, their laughter practiced, their eyes always scanning the room for someone more important. The men talked in half-truths and boasts, each story a competition to prove who was richer, smarter, more connected. Daniel fit in with them almost immediately. He was charming, I'll give him that. He had a way of spinning stories, of making his rough beginnings sound like a badge of honor, rather than something he used to curse when bills piled up. They loved him for that, the self-made man with a sudden windfall, the guy who'd earned his spot at their table. I stood beside him, smiling politely, nodding when expected, but no one looked at me for long. I was background noise, a prop to his performance. At home, things shifted too. He started staying out later, claiming business dinners, gym sessions, networking drinks. He said it so casually, as if it was all part of the life we'd stepped into. But the man who used to hurry home to eat with me now barely noticed when I cooked. One evening, I made his favorite: roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, the kind of meal I used to stretch over 2 days when money was tight. I set it on the table, lit a candle, and waited. The clock ticked past 7, then 8, then 9. When he finally stumbled in, the smell of whiskey clinging to him, I was sitting at the table alone. The food was cold. "You could have called," I said quietly. He frowned, loosening his tie. "I told you I had a dinner meeting." "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did. Maybe you weren't listening." The words cut deeper than they should have, because the truth was, I had been listening. I always listened. That night, he didn't touch the dinner I'd meet him. He poured himself another drink and fell asleep on the couch with the TV humming. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the man who used to kiss my forehead when he came home late, whispering apologies, promising to make it up to me. Now there were no apologies, only excuses. And then came the secrecy. It started with his phone. He used to leave it lying around without a thought. Now it was always face down, always in his pocket. He changed the passcode without telling me. Once, when I reached for it to check the time, he snatched it back so quickly it startled me. "What are you hiding?" I asked. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. But ridiculous or not, the seed of doubt was planted. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself he was just overwhelmed, adjusting to this new life. But there were moments, too many moments, when I caught him staring at his reflection, adjusting his hair, straightening his clothes, smiling a smile I didn't recognize. One night, as we prepared to leave for yet another gala, I caught him lingering in front of the mirror. He adjusted his tie, tilted his chin, studied himself with an intensity I had never seen before. "You look good," I said softly, trying to bridge the widening gap between us. He glanced at me, then back at his reflection. "Yeah," he said. "I do." The way he said it made my stomach sink. At the gala, I noticed him again with that same woman I had seen at our party weeks before, the one in the glittering dress, all curves and coy smiles. She was at his elbow, laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm too often, too easily. When I approached, Daniel barely acknowledged me. He didn't introduce me, again. I stood there, invisible, while they shared some private joke. I wanted to scream, to grab him away, to demand to know who she was and why he looked at her with the same hunger I used to see directed at me. But I didn't. I smiled, nodded, swallowed my anger like a bitter pill. Later that night, when we got home, I asked him again. "Who is she?" "She's nobody," he said, pulling off his jacket. "Just someone connected to the investors I've been talking to." "Investors? You don't need investors. We have money." He shot me a look, sharp and irritated. "Do you have any idea how things work in this world, Claire? You don't just sit on money. You grow it. You expand. You wouldn't understand." The words landed like a slap. You wouldn't understand. As if I wasn't his wife. As if the life we'd built together before the money didn't matter, didn't count. I went to bed that night feeling smaller than I had in years. And deep down, though I didn't want to admit it, I knew something was unraveling. Slowly, quietly, but surely. The man I loved was slipping away through doors I wasn't allowed to walk through. There are silences in marriage that feel safe, like the quiet after a shared laugh or the stillness of lying together at night. And then there are silences that suffocate, filling a room until you can't breathe. That was the silence that crept into our home. Daniel stopped asking me about my day. He stopped telling me about his. Conversations that once stretched into the early hours now shrank into clipped exchanges over breakfast. I'd ask if he was coming home for dinner, and he'd shrug, already scrolling through his phone. The bed felt colder, too. We used to tangle together, limbs intertwined, the steady beat of his heart against my back, lulling me to sleep. Now he rolled away. Sometimes he didn't come to bed at all, falling asleep in the study with his laptop glowing long into the night. I tried to reach him. God knows I tried. I suggested weekend trips, quiet dinners, even just a walk around the neighborhood. He always had an excuse. Too busy, too tired, too much to do. Once I finally snapped. "Do you even want to spend time with me anymore?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't look up from his phone. "Don't be dramatic, Claire." "Dramatic?" My chest tightened. "I'm your wife, Daniel. I hardly see you anymore." He sighed, as if I were a child pestering him. "We're building a new life. That takes work. Not everything can be like it used to be." I wanted to scream that I never asked for this life, that all I ever wanted was him, but the words caught in my throat, strangled by the look of irritation on his face. That look became more frequent. He used to smile when I walked into a room. Now he barely glanced up. He used to reach for my hand across the table. Now his fingers curled around his phone instead. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles, but in inches. The inches between us on the couch, in the bed, in the spaces where love used to live. I told myself it was just an adjustment, that wealth had shaken our foundation and we needed time to rebuild it. But even as I whispered those reassurances to myself, I knew something deeper was wrong. It wasn't just the late nights or the parties. It was the way he spoke to me, or rather, the way he didn't. His words were curt, dismissive, sometimes cruel. One night, as we got ready for yet another gala, I hesitated in front of the mirror. I had bought a new dress, something elegant but modest, soft blue satin that fell just above my ankles. I thought it looked lovely. When Daniel walked in, adjusting his cufflinks, I turned and asked, "What do you think?" He glanced at me, then back at his reflection. "It's fine." "Fine?" "Yeah, it's okay." The sting was sharper than I expected. He didn't even notice the effort I'd put in, the hours I'd spent second-guessing every detail. At the gala, it was worse. I caught him staring at that same woman again, the one with the glittering dresses and the coy smiles. She was there, as always, orbiting him like a planet caught in his gravity. I leaned in, whispering, "Daniel, people are noticing how close you are to her." His jaw tightened. "Don't start." "I'm not starting, I'm asking." He turned on me then, his voice low but sharp. "Do you have to embarrass me everywhere we go?" Embarrass him? As if I were the problem. I swallowed my words, blinking back tears, because the last thing I wanted was to make a scene, but inside something cracked. That night, I cried in the bathroom with the shower running so he wouldn't hear. The gaslighting began soon after. Subtle at first. I'd question where he'd been, and he'd insist I'd told him already.
I'd ask about Miss Dimmers, and he'd claim I was exaggerating. "You're imagining things," he'd say, frustration lacing his voice. "You're always so paranoid lately." But I wasn't imagining the way he smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. I wasn't imagining the lipstick smudge once faintly visible on his collar, brushed away too late. I wasn't imagining the phone calls he took in another room, his voice low, laughter I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Every time I confronted him, he made me feel small, crazy, jealous. "Why are you trying to pick fights?" he'd snap. "Can't you just enjoy what we have?" What did we have? A mansion full of cold rooms, cars I didn't care to drive, jewelry that sparkled on my dresser but felt heavy on my skin, and a husband who was slipping through my fingers. One night, I found myself standing in the middle of our cavernous living room, staring at the glittering chandelier overhead. The silence pressed down on me, so heavy I could hardly breathe. I thought of our tiny apartment above the bakery, of the leaky faucet and the peeling wallpaper. I thought of the laughter that used to fill that space, the warmth of simply being enough for each other. And for the first time, I wondered if we'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe we hadn't won $7 million after all. Maybe we'd lost everything that mattered.
It wasn't one thing. It was dozens of little things, strung together like beads on a necklace I didn't want to wear. A forgotten receipt in his jacket pocket from a restaurant I'd never heard of. 2 glasses of wine, 2 entrees, the total far more than Daniel and I ever spent on dinner together. The way he guarded his phone, like it held state secrets. I'd catch the faint vibration late at night, a glow beneath the covers. If I stirred, he'd turn his back, the screen pressed to his chest. The smell. Faint, but unmistakable. A perfume I didn't own. Sweet and heady, clinging to his shirt when he came home late from the gym. At first, I told myself stories. Maybe he was meeting business partners. Maybe the perfume was from someone brushing past him at a crowded gala. Maybe I was paranoid. But deep down, I knew. The truth doesn't come in a single blow. It seeps in slowly, like water through a crack. By the time you notice, the foundation is already crumbling. One evening, I decided to test him. He had told me he was going to meet a client for dinner. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and let him leave. Then, I followed him. I felt like a thief in my own life, creeping into my car, trailing behind his sleek black one through city streets. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, my stomach knotted with a dread I could hardly breathe through. He didn't drive toward the business district. He drove toward the edge of town, to a restaurant tucked into a quiet corner, the kind of place that promised privacy. I parked far enough away that he wouldn't notice and watched as he got out. And then she appeared. The woman, the one I'd seen at the parties. She stepped out of a cab in a red dress that clung to her like fire. He greeted her with a smile I hadn't seen in months, a smile that reached his eyes, soft and eager. And then he kissed her. Not on the cheek, not casually, a kiss that was too intimate, too familiar. My heart stopped. I sat frozen, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, watching my husband kiss another woman under the soft glow of the restaurant lights. Every excuse I'd told myself, every lie I'd swallowed, shattered in that instant. He led her inside, his hand resting on the small of her back in a way that once belonged to me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was sit there, staring at the door that had swallowed them both, while the world I thought I knew collapsed around me. I wanted to storm inside, to drag him out, to scream and demand answers, but I didn't. I sat there for nearly an hour, tears streaming silently down my face,
until the sight of them laughing through the restaurant window became unbearable. When I finally drove home, the house felt colder than ever. The chandelier above me glittered cruelly, mocking me. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and slid down the cool tiles until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to my chest. He came home past midnight, humming under his breath, smelling faintly of wine and perfume. "You're still up?" he asked casually, tossing his jacket onto the chair. I stared at him, my face still blotchy from crying, and said nothing. "Claire, what's wrong with you?" I wanted to scream, You are what's wrong. But instead, I whispered, "Where were you?" "I told you. Dinner with a client." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly it made me sick. "Daniel," my voice broke. "Don't lie to me." He froze for a fraction of a second, then his expression hardened. "You're insane. Do you hear yourself? Following me, making up stories? This money has made you paranoid. Maybe you can't handle it." And just like that, he turned it on me. He walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart in pieces. But I knew the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes. And no matter how much he gaslighted me, no matter how many lies he wrapped in silk, I would never unsee the way he kissed her.
I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing beside me. How could he sleep so easily? How could he rest in our bed, under the same sheets we once tangled ourselves in after what I had seen? I replayed it again and again in my mind. The kiss, the way his hand lingered on her back, the laughter they shared. Each detail stabbed deeper, a wound that refused to close. By morning, I was raw, exhausted, trembling with anger that had been festering in silence too long. When he came into the kitchen, freshly showered, wearing a crisp shirt and that smug confidence I no longer recognized, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "We need to talk," I said. He poured himself coffee, ignoring the steel in my voice. "About what?" "About her." His hand froze for just a fraction of a second. Then he turned, brows furrowed in mock confusion. "Her who?" "Don't do that," I snapped. My voice cracked, sharp and trembling. "Don't pretend you don't know. I saw you, Daniel, at the restaurant. With her." He set the cup down harder than necessary, liquid sloshing over the rim. His jaw tightened. "You followed me? That's all you have to say?" My chest heaved, rage and heartbreak colliding inside me. Not an explanation, not even an excuse, just outrage that I caught you? He rubbed his hand over his face, exhaling loudly. "Jesus, Claire, you even hear yourself? You're paranoid. You've been spiraling for weeks, making up stories, seeing things that aren't there." "I saw you kiss her." The words tore from my throat, jagged and raw. The room went silent. His eyes flickered, just for a moment, and that was all the confirmation I needed. But instead of owning it, he leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, cold calculation hardening his features. "You're imagining things," he said again, slower this time, like he was speaking to a child. "You think every woman who talks to me wants me. You're insecure. That's not my fault." My hands shook. "Insecure? You're cheating on me, Daniel." His voice rose, sharp and vicious. "Stop saying that. You sound insane." The words hit me like a slap. Insane? Paranoid? Dramatic? All the labels he'd started throwing at me, one after another, as though if he repeated them enough, I might start believing them. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall.
I gave you everything. I stood by you when we had nothing. And now that you have money, now that people look at you differently, you think you can throw me away for some shiny distraction?" His face twisted, cruel in a way I had never seen before. "Don't make this about you. This money changed everything, Claire. We're not the same people we were in that apartment. I've grown. Maybe you haven't." The words sliced through me. "Grown?" My voice cracked on the word. "You mean you've outgrown me?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, the air heavy with everything unsaid. Then he grabbed his keys, muttered something about needing to clear his head, and walked out, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. I crumpled to the floor, sobs racking my body. It wasn't just the cheating, it wasn't just the lies. It was the realization that the man I had loved, the man I had built my life with, was gone, replaced by someone colder, hungrier, unrecognizable. And maybe, just maybe, he had been there all along, waiting for the right moment, the right temptation to surface. When he returned hours later, I was still on the couch, hollow and broken. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He poured himself a drink, sat in the armchair, and turned on the TV like nothing had happened. The silence between us was no longer suffocating. It was deadly. Because I knew, in that silence, that something had shattered beyond repair. And though I hadn't admitted it out loud yet, a truth was forming in my chest like a storm. The man I married wasn't coming back.
After our confrontation, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I stopped hoping for apologies that would never come. Instead, I started watching. Quietly. Carefully. Like a woman living with a stranger, waiting to catch him in the act. It didn't take long. One evening, Daniel said he was heading to the gym. He left in his workout clothes, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his cologne strong enough to linger after the door closed. I sat on the couch, staring at the clock. Something about the way he left felt rehearsed, too clean, too easy. Minutes later, I walked into the study to grab a blanket. That's when I saw it, his duffel bag, sitting on the chair. He hadn't taken it with him. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I unzipped the bag. Inside was a shirt, folded neatly. Not a gym shirt, an expensive button-down, the kind he wore to dinners and galas. Beneath it, a box. I pulled it out with trembling hands. It was jewelry. Diamond earrings, delicate and glittering, far too extravagant for me. I knew, because he hadn't bought me anything in months. The room spun around me. I clutched the earrings so tightly the prongs dug into my palm. My husband was dressing up for someone else, buying jewelry for someone else, lying to my face. My breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. I shoved the earrings back into the bag, zipped it shut, and sat there in the silence, fury and heartbreak swirling together until I thought I might choke on them both. That night, when he returned hours later, damp hair sticking to his forehead, he smelled faintly of perfume again. He kissed the top of my head absent-mindedly, as though I were a child waiting at home. "Good workout?" I asked, my voice steady, though my chest burned. "Yeah," he said easily. "Tough one." I nodded, biting back the scream in my throat. 2 days later, the final blow came. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't snooping. I had simply gone to do laundry, pulling his suit jacket from the hamper. As I checked the pockets, my fingers brushed against a slip of paper.
A hotel receipt. I unfolded it with shaking hands. 1 night stay, a luxury suite, 2 meals charged to the room. The date was the same night he'd told me he was out late finalizing paperwork. I stared at the receipt until the numbers blurred. There it was, in black and white. Not suspicion, not paranoia, not a half-glimpsed kiss or a whiff of perfume. Proof. My hands trembled so violently, I dropped the paper. I sank to the floor, clutching it to my chest, my sobs tearing through the quiet house. For hours, I couldn't move. This was real. He wasn't just slipping away from me. He was gone. Later that night, I placed the receipt on the dining table. I didn't say a word, just left it there, waiting for him to see it. When he walked in, he spotted it instantly. His eyes flicked from the paper to me. For a moment, something passed over his face. Panic, guilt, fear. Then, just as quickly, it hardened into cold defiance. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "In your pocket." My voice shook, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. His lips curled into something almost like a sneer. "You've been going through my things now? Jesus, Claire." "Don't you dare turn this on me," I whispered, tears burning hot in my eyes. "You lied. You cheated. You broke us." Silence. And then, with chilling calm, he said, "Maybe we were already broken." The words knocked the breath from my lungs. No denial, no apology. Just that. Maybe we were already broken. I wanted to scream, to throw the receipt at him, to make him feel even an ounce of the pain clawing through me. But I couldn't. My voice was gone. My strength was gone. I simply stood, walked past him, and locked myself in the bedroom. On the other side of the door, I heard the faint clink of ice in a glass, the TV flicking on, his laughter, low, bitter, at something on the screen. And that was when I knew. The man who had once held my face in his hands and promised me forever wasn't coming back. He had chosen someone else, and I was left holding the shattered pieces of the life we'd built.
The house became a battlefield of silence. Days stretched on like a sentence I couldn't escape. Daniel and I barely spoke, circling each other like strangers trapped under the same roof. When words did pass between us, they were sharp, clipped, meant only to wound. He stopped pretending. He no longer cared to hide the late nights, the phone calls that ended when I entered the room, the scent of perfume that clung to him. He didn't bother explaining anymore, didn't waste energy spinning lies. In a way, that was worse. Lies at least meant he cared enough to keep up appearances. Now, his indifference cut deeper than any excuse could. I, meanwhile, unraveled quietly. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I wandered the house like a ghost, unable to sit in the living room without remembering the nights we curled up on the couch, laughing at sitcoms and sharing bowls of popcorn. The kitchen mocked me with echoes of shared breakfasts, his hand brushing mine as we both reached for the coffee pot. Everything I touched, every corner of that house, whispered reminders of a love that was slipping through my fingers. One night, when he came home past midnight smelling of whiskey and someone else's perfume, I snapped. "Was she worth it?" I asked, standing in the doorway, my arms wrapped around myself to keep from shaking. He paused, keys still in his hand. His eyes flicked to mine, and for a split second, I saw the man I once loved, the guilt, the hesitation, the flicker of shame. But then it was gone.
His mouth twisted into something cruel. "Don't do this, Claire." "Answer me," I whispered. "Is she worth destroying everything? Our life, our marriage?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You don't get it. You never have. This," he gestured vaguely around him, "this life we built, it's not enough for me anymore." The words hit like a bullet. "Not enough?" My voice cracked. "I gave you everything, every part of me, and now it's not enough? You're clinging to the past, to the man I used to be, but I've changed, and maybe I need someone who understands that." Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and relentless. "You mean you need someone new?" He didn't deny it. The silence stretched between us, heavy and final. Something inside me broke then. Not the sharp shattering of glass, but the slow, devastating crumble of stone worn down by years of erosion. The realization that the man I loved was gone, and no amount of begging, crying, or remembering could bring him back. That night, I slept in the guest room. It became my sanctuary, my prison. The bed was smaller, harder, but it was mine. I could close the door and shut out the sound of his phone buzzing at 2 a.m., the low murmurs of his laughter as he whispered to someone else. In that room, I cried silently into my pillow, clutching it to my chest as if it could hold me together. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, trying to imagine a future that no longer had him in it. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the way he looked at me now. Not with anger, not even with hatred. With indifference. As though I were no longer part of his story. As though our years together, our struggles, our promises, none of it mattered anymore. That indifference hollowed me out in ways I didn't know were possible. Because how do you fight for someone who has already stopped seeing you? The breaking point came on a Tuesday of all days, the most ordinary of days, midweek, gray skies, the kind of day that should pass unnoticed, but it didn't. That morning, I woke up in the guest room again. My pillow was damp, my body aching from nights of restless sleep. I dragged myself downstairs, making coffee out of habit more than desire. The smell filled the kitchen, but it felt hollow, like everything else. Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter. He'd left it there, carelessly, when he stepped into the shower. I don't know what compelled me to reach for it. Maybe curiosity, maybe desperation. Maybe I wanted to be wrong, to find nothing but work emails and group chats about stocks. But the screen lit up with her name. Last night was perfect. Can't wait for this weekend. Heart. The air vanished from my lungs. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. He wasn't just cheating. He was making plans. He was building something with her while tearing me apart, piece by piece. The shower shut off upstairs. Panic surged through me. I placed the phone exactly where it had been, as though positioning it could erase what I had seen. My heart pounded in my ears as he came down the stairs, towel slung around his waist, humming casually. "Morning," he said, grabbing a mug. I stared at him, my body trembling. My hands were fists at my sides, nails biting into my skin. "How long?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. He froze, mug halfway to his lips. "What?" I swallowed hard, my throat burned. "How long, Daniel? How long have you been with her?" His eyes darkened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Claire. Don't lie to me, I snapped, my voice rising. I saw the message. I know. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then he set the mug down slowly, carefully, like he was handling something fragile. His expression shifted. No guilt this time, no fear, just exhaustion, as though my discovery was more of an inconvenience than a betrayal. A few months, maybe more. The words tore through me. Months, maybe more. While I cooked dinner, folded his shirts, kissed him goodnight, he was living another life. I felt my knees weaken, the room tilting. I gripped the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. Why? My voice cracked, raw and broken. Why her? Why anyone? He looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't cruelty. It was worse. It was apathy. Because she makes me feel alive. Because I'm not the man I used to be, Claire. And with you, I feel trapped. Like I'm suffocating in a life I didn't mean to build. The words struck harder than any slap. Trapped? Suffocating? Was that what our love had become to him? A cage? Something inside me shattered. But in the rubble, something else stirred. A flame I hadn't felt in months. I straightened, my hands still trembling, but my voice steady. Then leave, I whispered. If I'm a cage, if I'm nothing but chains to you, then get out. Go run to her, but don't you dare keep me here in the dark while you play house with someone else. His jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked unsettled. You don't mean that, he said. But I did. God, I did. I deserve better than this, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. Better than being your second choice. Better than watching you throw away everything we built like it was nothing. The kitchen fell silent, my words hanging in the air between us like a verdict. He opened his mouth to speak, then shut it again. He grabbed his phone from the counter and left the room without another word. The door slammed behind him, and for the first time since his betrayal began, I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. I stood there, clutching the counter, breathing hard, the echo of my own words replaying in my mind. I deserve better. For the first time, I believed it.
The silence after the door slammed was deafening. I stood in the kitchen for what felt like hours, staring at the space where Daniel had just been. His absence felt heavier than his presence ever had. For the first time, I understood. The separation wasn't coming. It had already begun. I spent the next few days moving on autopilot. Work, groceries, laundry, pretending, always pretending. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't begging anymore. I wasn't clinging to scraps. I was preparing. I began small, quietly, carefully. I opened a bank account in my name. I moved a little money at a time, just enough that he wouldn't notice right away. I gathered documents, marriage certificate, property records, bank statements, and stored them in a folder I kept hidden at the bottom of the guest room closet. Every step I took was like reclaiming a piece of myself. But the nights were still brutal. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of his key in the lock. Some nights, he didn't come home at all. Other nights, he stumbled in at 3 a.m., smelling of perfume and expensive whiskey, collapsing into bed without a word. And still I kept going. Because the more he pulled away, the clearer my path became. The breaking point came one evening when he announced, casually, over dinner, "I'll be gone this weekend, a business trip." I looked up from my plate,
my fork frozen midair. A business trip? He didn't meet my eyes. Yeah, Vegas. Don't wait up. Something inside me snapped. I set the fork down slowly, deliberately. My hands trembled, but my voice was calm. Too calm. You mean you're going away with her? His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. What did you say? I met his gaze, unflinching. Stop insulting me with lies, Daniel. I know where you're going, and I won't sit here playing the blind wife while you parade around with her. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Finally, he leaned back, crossing his arms. So what? What do you want me to say, Claire? That I love her? That I don't love you anymore? The words were meant to wound, and they did. But instead of shattering me, they steeled me. I took a deep breath. No. What I want is for you to pack your things. Tonight. His expression faltered. For the first time, he looked unsure. Claire. No. My voice rose, shaking but fierce. I'm done. You've already left me in every way that matters. Now it's time you leave this house too.
The silence stretched. He stared at me, jaw tight, but he didn't argue. Without another word, he stood, pushed his chair back, and left the table. I sat there, listening to the thud of drawers opening, the sound of zippers, the shuffle of footsteps upstairs. Each sound was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. When he finally came down, suitcase in hand, I didn't cry. He paused by the door, glancing at me one last time. His eyes searched mine, maybe for anger, maybe for love, but all he found was emptiness. And then he was gone. The silence that followed wasn't suffocating anymore. It was liberating. I exhaled a shaky, broken sound that felt like the first breath of freedom. The separation wasn't a choice anymore. It was reality. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. The first morning without him was the strangest. I woke up to silence. No sound of Daniel in the shower. No phone buzzing on the nightstand. No scent of his cologne lingering in the hallway. Just silence. Deep and unfamiliar. For a moment, I lay there, paralyzed by the weight of it. The house felt enormous, cavernous, like it had been stripped of its soul overnight. I wondered if this was what widows felt like, except my grief wasn't for someone who had died, but for someone who had chosen to leave me behind. I cried until my chest ached, until my body shook with it, until there were no tears left. And then, when the sobs finally subsided, I got up. I made coffee for one. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. And slowly, the truth began to settle. He was gone. But I was still here. The world hadn't ended. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it lit a faint spark somewhere inside me. The days that followed were a blur of calls and conversations I'd been dreading. I told my parents first. My mother gasped, her voice cracking, while my father stayed silent for a long moment before saying quietly, "You'll be okay, sweetheart. You're stronger than you think." I wanted to believe him. Telling friends was harder. Some were shocked. Some weren't. A few admitted they'd noticed Daniel's distance long before I had. Their pity stung, but their support was a lifeline. They showed up with wine, with takeout, with late-night phone calls that kept me from drowning in the quiet. The hardest part was telling myself. I stood in front of the mirror one night, staring at my reflection. My eyes were swollen, my hair tangled, my face pale and tired. "Claire," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He's gone, but you are not. You are still here." It felt strange speaking to myself, but it helped. The practical side of things loomed quickly. I met with a lawyer. I opened up about the cheating, the separation, the money. She was sharp, pragmatic, and unsparing. "You've got leverage," she said. "You stayed faithful. You built this life together. Don't let him bully you into taking less than what you're owed." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't walking into battle alone. I also made a list. Small, practical things I could do to reclaim the house, reclaim my life. I boxed up the suits he'd left behind. I stripped the bed of sheets that smelled like him. I started rearranging furniture, shifting the space until it felt less like ours and more like mine. Every change was small, but it mattered. Because with each drawer I emptied, each picture I took down, I was building a new life, brick by brick, piece by piece. The nights were still the hardest. Sometimes I woke up reaching for him, only to find emptiness. Sometimes I dreamed of him, the way he used to be, and woke up gasping from the loss. But other nights, I slept deeply for the first time in months, no longer waiting for the sound of his key in the lock. And those nights reminded me, freedom could be lonely, but it was also peaceful. For the first time in a long time, the house wasn't filled with lies. Only me. Only truth. And that was enough. Hello! If you like stories like this, subscribe to this channel to not miss new videos.